The woman trembling on the floor looked like a homeless beggar. The wealthy crowd laughed and took photos. The manager screamed for security to drag her out. But nobody knew the truth. That homeless woman was worth more than everyone in that room combined. And the waitress who lost her job to save her? She was about to inherit a kingdom. But first, she had to lose everything she had. Welcome to the story room. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. Have you ever wondered if doing the right thing is worth losing everything? Let me tell you about a girl named Sophie Bennett. She was 24 years old, working as a waitress in London at a fancy restaurant called the Crystal Room. This wasn't just any restaurant. This was where millionaires came to eat gold-covered desserts and drink wine that cost more than Sophie's monthly rent. Sophie was exhausted. Every night, she smiled at wealthy customers who treated her like she was invisible. Every morning, she counted coins, praying she had enough for her father's hospital bills. You see, Sophie's dad had cancer. The treatments were expensive. So expensive that Sophie worked double shifts, skipped meals, and hadn't bought herself new shoes in 2 years. Her manager was a man named Richard Pierce. Richard was the kind of person who wore expensive cologne but had a cheap heart. He shouted at the staff, made them work through their breaks, and acted like he owned them just because he had a little bit of power. On this particular Wednesday evening, London was drowning in rain. The kind of rain that feels like the sky is crying. Inside the Crystal Room, everything was warm and golden. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Soft piano music played in the background. Rich people laughed and clinked their glasses together. Sophie was carrying a tray of champagne when she heard Richard yelling near the entrance. "Get away from here. You're dripping water all over my clean floors." Sophie turned and saw something that made her heart break. An old woman stood shivering in the doorway. She looked about 70 years old, maybe older. Her gray hair was soaked and stuck to her face. She wore a thin jacket that was torn at the sleeves. Her shoes were falling apart. She was shaking so badly that Sophie could see it from across the room. "Please," the old woman whispered. "I'm so cold. I just need to sit down for a moment." "This is a private establishment," Richard shouted. "We don't serve homeless people here. Leave now, or I'm calling the police." The old woman tried to take another step forward, but her legs gave out. She collapsed onto the marble floor with a terrible sound. Her shopping bag fell open, spilling out a few pieces of wet newspaper and an old photograph. And then something horrible happened. The wealthy customers started laughing. A woman in diamonds pointed at the old lady and took a photo with her phone. "Oh my God, this is unbelievable," she said to her husband. "Can you believe they let people like this walk in here?" Her husband laughed. Security must be sleeping. What a disaster. More people joined in. They weren't helping. They were watching like it was entertainment. Like this suffering woman was a joke put there for their amusement. Sophie felt something snap inside her chest. She looked at the old woman on the cold floor. She looked at the laughing crowd. She looked at Richard, who was snapping his fingers at the security guard to drag the woman out. And Sophie made a choice. She dropped her tray. The champagne glasses shattered on the floor with a loud crash that made everyone go silent. And then Sophie ran. "Danvers, what are you doing?" Richard screamed. Sophie didn't answer. She ran across the restaurant floor and dropped to her knees beside the old woman. The marble was hard and cold, but Sophie didn't care. She took off her work jacket and wrapped it around the woman's shaking shoulders. "It's okay," Sophie said softly, her voice gentle. "I've got you. You're going to be okay." The old woman's eyes were confused and scared. She was freezing cold. Her lips were turning blue. My son," the woman whispered. "I can't find my son." "We'll find him," Sophie promised. "But first, we need to get you warm." Richard was standing over them now, his face red with anger. "Sophie Danvers, if you don't get up right now and get back to work, you're fired. Do you hear me? Fired." Sophie looked up at him. For the first time in 2 years, she wasn't afraid. "She needs help," Sophie said clearly. "She's a human being. Doesn't that matter to you?" "What matters," Richard hissed, is that you are making a scene in front of my customers. You're embarrassing this establishment." The woman with diamonds laughed again. "Honestly, this is ridiculous. We came here for a nice dinner, not to watch some charity case." Something inside Sophie caught fire. A charity case? Sophie stood up, still holding the old woman gently. "You're sitting there in your expensive dress, laughing at someone who's cold and scared and alone. And you think she's the problem?" The restaurant went completely silent. "She's just a homeless person," the diamond woman said, but her voice was quieter now, less confident. "She's a person," Sophie said, her voice shaking with emotion. "She's somebody's mother, somebody's grandmother. She's not trash. She's not invisible. She's real. And right now, she needs help more than you need your fourth glass of wine." Richard grabbed Sophie's arm. "That's it. You're done. Get your things. Get out. And take that woman with you." Sophie looked at the old woman, who was crying now, silent tears running down her wrinkled face. "Fine," Sophie said. "I'll leave. But I'm not leaving her alone." Sophie helped the woman to her feet. The old lady was so light, like a bird. Sophie held her steady as they walked toward the door. Every step felt like a lifetime. The wealthy customers watched in silence now. Some looked ashamed. Most looked away. As they reached the door, Sophie heard the woman with diamonds say to her husband, "Well, that was dramatic." And then they were outside. The rain was pouring down like a waterfall. The street was dark and cold. Sophie had no umbrella, no coat, and exactly 19 pounds in her purse. She had just lost her job. She had no idea how she would pay her father's medical bills next week. But she looked at the old woman shivering beside her, and she smiled. "Come on," Sophie said gently. "There's a little cafe down the street. Let's get you some hot soup." The old woman squeezed Sophie's hand. You lost your job because of me." "No," Sophie said firmly. "I lost my job because I chose kindness over cruelty. And I'd make that choice again. Every single time." What Sophie didn't know was that at that exact moment, 3 black Range Rovers were speeding through London. Inside the first car, a man was shouting into his phone, "I don't care what it takes. Find my mother. She has dementia. She could be anywhere in this rain. Find her." And in less than 10 minutes, that man's entire world was about to collide with Sophie's. The cafe was called Rosie's. It was small and warm, with steamy windows and the smell of fresh bread. The kind of place where nobody cared if you were rich or poor. They just cared that you were human. Sophie guided the old woman to a corner booth. She ordered 2 bowls of tomato soup and 2 cups of tea. It cost 12 pounds. Sophie now had 7 pounds left to her name. But watching the old woman wrap her cold hands around the warm mug made it worth it. "What's her name?" Sophie asked gently. The old woman frowned, like she was searching through fog. "Grace," she said finally. "My name is Grace." "That's a beautiful name," Sophie said. "I'm Sophie." "Sophie," Grace repeated, testing the word. "You have kind eyes, Sophie. Like my son. But he's always so busy. Building things. Big, tall buildings that touch the sky. He says, 'Mother, stay home where it's safe.' But I miss the music. I miss the dancing." Sophie held Grace's hand across the table. "What kind of music do you like?" "Jazz," Grace said, and suddenly her eyes cleared a little. "My husband used to play the saxophone. He died 10 years ago. But sometimes I can still hear his music. So I walk. And I try to find where the music is coming from. But then I get lost." Sophie's heart ached. She understood now. Grace wasn't homeless. She was lost. She was confused. She was someone's precious mother, wandering the streets trying to find a memory. "Does your son know you went out?" Sophie asked carefully. Grace looked worried. "He'll be angry. He's always angry when I wander. But I don't mean to worry him. I forget where I am sometimes." Sophie was about to respond when the door of the cafe exploded open. 3 men in dark suits walked in. They looked like they belonged in an action movie, not a small cafe in London. They were followed by a 4th man. This man was different. He was tall, probably in his early 30s, wearing an expensive suit that was soaked through with rain. His dark hair was messy. His eyes were wild with panic and fear. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Those eyes scanned the cafe desperately. And then they locked onto Grace. "Mother," the man shouted. He ran across the cafe and dropped to his knees beside the booth. He grabbed Grace's hands and pressed them to his face. Sophie could see he was crying. "Mum. Oh God, Mum. I thought I'd lost you. I thought." His voice broke. Grace looked at him with confusion that slowly melted into recognition. "Thomas? Thomas, is that you?" "Yes, Mum. It's me. It's Tommy. I'm here now. You're safe." Sophie started to stand up, thinking she should give them privacy. But the man looked up at her suddenly. His eyes were red but sharp. Intelligent. Intense. "Who are you?" he asked. "I'm Sophie. I found your mother outside a restaurant. She was cold, so I brought her here for some soup." Thomas looked at Sophie. Really looked at her. He saw her wet waitress uniform. He saw the name tag still pinned to her shirt. He saw the exhaustion in her face and the kindness in her eyes. "Found her where?" Thomas asked quietly. "At the Crystal Room." Thomas's expression changed. It went from relief to confusion to something harder. Colder. "The Crystal Room," he repeated. "That restaurant on Park Lane?" "Yes." "What happened there?" Sophie hesitated. She came in from the rain. She was confused and cold. The manager wanted to throw her out. The customers were. Sophie's voice caught. They were laughing at her. Thomas stood up slowly. His jaw was clenched, so tight Sophie could see the muscles twitching. "They laughed at my mother." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. A fact that he was processing. "Yes," Sophie said quietly. "And you?" Thomas looked at her. "What did you do?" "I helped her. I gave her my jacket. I brought her here. I lost my job because of it. But that's okay. She needed help." Thomas stared at Sophie like she was speaking a foreign language. Like the concept of helping a stranger at personal cost was something he'd never encountered before. One of the men in suits stepped forward. "Sir, we should get your mother home. She needs to see Dr. Morrison." "Yes," Thomas said, not taking his eyes off Sophie. "Yes, of course." He gently helped Grace to her feet. "Come on, Mum. Let's go home." "But what about Sophie?" Grace asked, looking back. "She bought me soup. I didn't even finish it." "We'll make sure Sophie is taken care of," Thomas said. He pulled out his wallet and placed a small card on the table. It was black, made of metal, heavy and cold-looking. "That's my private number," Thomas said. "Call me tomorrow. Please. I need to thank you properly. I need to understand what happened." Sophie picked up the card. It simply said, Thomas Hart. And below that, Hart Property Development. Sophie's eyes widened. Everyone in London knew that name. Hart Property Development built half the skyscrapers in the city. They were one of the wealthiest companies in Europe, which meant Thomas Hart was. "You're a billionaire," Sophie whispered. Thomas gave her a sad, tired smile.
"Yes.
"But all that money couldn't find my mother. All my security teams and tracking devices couldn't keep her safe. But you did. A waitress with 19 pounds in her purse did what my entire empire couldn't do." He squeezed Sophie's shoulder gently. "Call me tomorrow. Please." And then they were gone. The cafe seemed smaller without them. Quieter. Sophie sat down in the booth and stared at the black card in her hand. She had no idea that calling that number would change her entire life. Sophie didn't sleep that night. She lay in her tiny apartment, listening to her father cough in the next room, wondering if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. No job. No money coming in. The rent was due in 5 days. Her father's next treatment was in a week, and they were already behind on payments. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw Grace's scared face. And she knew she'd made the right choice. The next morning, Sophie's phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello." Sophie answered nervously. "Miss Bennett? This is James, Mr. Hart's personal assistant." Mr. Hart would like to meet with you today. A car will pick you up at noon. The address you're at now is fine. We have it. Sophie's stomach flipped. How do you have my address? Mr. Hart is very thorough. The car will be there at noon. The line went dead. At exactly noon, a sleek black car pulled up outside Sophie's building. The driver was polite and silent. They drove through London, past the tourist attractions, past the business district, and into an area Sophie had only seen on TV, where the houses weren't houses. They were estates, mansions, palaces. They stopped at a gate that looked like it belonged to a castle. It opened automatically. The driveway was longer than Sophie's entire street back home. Thomas Hart was waiting at the front door. He looked different in daylight, less panicked, but there was something in his eyes. Something heavy. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Please come in." The house was overwhelming. Art on every wall. High ceilings. More rooms than Sophie could count. But Thomas led her to a small, cozy sitting room with a fireplace. Grace was there, sitting in a chair by the fire, looking peaceful. She smiled when she saw Sophie. "The soup girl," Grace said happily. Sophie laughed. "Hi, Grace." Thomas gestured for Sophie to sit. "My mother has good days and bad days," he explained quietly. "Today is a good day. She remembers you. That's rare. That's special." He sat across from Sophie, his hands clasped together. "I need to know everything that happened at the Crystal Room. Every detail." So Sophie told him. She told him about the laughing customers, about Richard's cruelty, about the woman in diamonds taking photos. She told him how Grace had fallen on the cold marble floor and how nobody helped. With each word, Thomas's expression grew darker. When Sophie finished, Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "I've already looked into it," he said finally. "I had my team pull security footage from the restaurant. I saw everything. I saw what they did to my mother. And I saw what you did." He stood up and walked to the window, his back to Sophie. "Do you know what I did after I brought my mother home last night?" Thomas asked. "No," Sophie said quietly. "I bought the Crystal Room, the building, the business, everything. It took 4 phone calls and about £20 million. I bought it, and then I shut it down. Permanently." Sophie's eyes widened. You closed the restaurant?" "It no longer exists," Thomas said, turning to face her. "Richard Pierce will never work in hospitality again. I've made sure of that." As for the customers who laughed, he pulled out his phone and showed Sophie a news article. The headline read, "Viral video exposes wealthy diners mocking elderly woman." "Someone at the restaurant that night posted the security footage online," Thomas explained. "It's been viewed 30 million times. The woman in diamonds? Her name is Victoria Cross. She's a socialite. Or she was. Now she's a pariah. Nobody will associate with her. Her charity board positions? Gone. Her social club memberships? Revoked. She's toxic." Sophie felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief. Justice. But also a bit of sadness. "I didn't want revenge," Sophie said quietly. "I know you didn't," Thomas said, sitting back down. "That's what makes you different. That's what makes you extraordinary." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Sophie, I've spent my entire life building an empire. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. I can buy anything. Anything except what matters most. I couldn't buy my mother's safety. I couldn't buy her health. I couldn't buy human decency from those people in that restaurant." His voice got quieter, more raw. "But you gave all of those things freely. You protected my mother when you had every reason not to. You had your own problems, your own struggles, but you still chose kindness." Sophie felt tears building behind her eyes. Thomas reached into a folder on the table and pulled out some papers. "I want to help you, Sophie. The way you helped my mother. I've arranged for your father to be transferred to a private medical facility, the best cancer treatment center in Europe. All expenses paid, for as long as he needs care." Sophie's hand flew to her mouth. "I can't, that's too much. I can't accept that." "Yes, you can," Thomas said firmly. "And there's more. I'm giving you the Crystal Room building. It's yours. Free and clear. Do whatever you want with it. Turn it into a community center. Open your own restaurant. Sell it. It's yours." Sophie was crying now. Full, gasping sobs.
Why?
"Why would you do this for me?" Thomas knelt down beside her chair. He took her hands gently. "Because you showed me something I'd forgotten," he said. "You reminded me that money and power mean nothing if you don't have humanity. You lost everything to help a stranger. And that stranger happened to be the most important person in my world." From her chair by the fire, Grace spoke up. "I like this girl, Tommy. She has a good heart. Don't let her go." Thomas smiled. "I don't intend to, Mum." 6 months later, the building that used to be the Crystal Room had been transformed. Sophie stood outside, looking up at the new sign. It glowed warm and golden in the evening light. Grace's table. It wasn't a fancy restaurant anymore. It was something better. Something real. Inside, there were families laughing. There were business people in suits sitting next to students in jeans. There was a corner where homeless people could come in from the cold and get a hot meal for free, no questions asked. There was a small stage where local musicians played jazz every night. The walls were covered with photos. Photos of the community. Photos of people helping each other. And right in the center, a large photo of Grace, smiling, holding a cup of tea. Sophie moved through the restaurant, checking on tables, greeting guests. She wore a simple black dress now, not a uniform. Her title wasn't waitress anymore. It was owner. Her father was doing better. The cancer treatment was working. He'd been strong enough to visit the restaurant last week, and he'd cried when he saw what Sophie had built. Richard, her old manager, had come by once. Not to eat. To ask for a job. Sophie had looked at him for a long moment, remembering his cruelty. Then she'd handed him a bag of food and the address of a job training program. "I can't hire you, Richard," she'd said. "But I won't let you go hungry either. That's not who I am." Now, as the evening rush began, Sophie heard the bell above the door ring. She looked up and smiled. Thomas walked in, holding Grace's arm. Grace was dressed beautifully in a blue dress, her hair styled, her eyes bright. She came to the restaurant 3 times a week. On her good days, she remembered Sophie's name. On her bad days, she just called her the kind girl. Either way was fine with Sophie. Thomas caught Sophie's eye across the room. Over the past 6 months, something had grown between them. It had started as gratitude. Then friendship. Now, it was something deeper. Something that made Sophie's heart beat faster when he walked into a room. He told her last week that he'd never met anyone like her. Someone who saw wealth and status as meaningless compared to human kindness. She told him that he'd changed too. That he'd stopped trying to control everything and started appreciating the beauty in simple moments. As Sophie walked over to greet them, a young couple approached her nervously. They looked poor. Their clothes were clean but worn. The man held the woman's hand tightly. "Excuse me," the man said. "We don't have much money, but we heard this place serves everyone. Is that true?" Sophie smiled. "It's absolutely true.
Come with me.
I'll find you the best table in the house." As she led them to a cozy corner booth, she passed Thomas. He reached out and squeezed her hand. "You're remarkable," he whispered. Sophie squeezed back. "I'm just doing what someone once taught me. Choosing kindness over cruelty." That night, as the restaurant filled with laughter and music and the smell of good food, Sophie stood by the window and looked out at the London streets. It was raining again, but this time, the rain felt like a blessing. A reminder of the night that had changed everything. She thought about how close she'd come to walking past Grace that night. How easy it would have been to keep her head down, to stay in line, to protect her job. But she hadn't. She'd chosen to see a human being instead of an inconvenience. And that single choice had created ripples that touched hundreds of lives. The wealthy customers who'd laughed that night had lost everything that mattered. Their reputation, their respect, their humanity. But Sophie, who'd lost a minimum wage job, had gained something priceless: purpose, family, and the knowledge that kindness is never wasted. As she watched the rain fall on the city, Thomas came to stand beside her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. Sophie smiled. "I'm thinking that the best thing I ever did was get fired." Thomas laughed. Then he took her hand. "You know what the strange thing is? I spent years building towers that reach the sky, trying to make my mark on the city. But you changed more lives with one act of kindness than I did with all my construction projects combined." "That's not true," Sophie said. "You've helped so many people. The cancer center for my dad. The job programs you funded. I only started doing those things after I met you." Thomas interrupted gently. "You showed me what really matters." From a table nearby, Grace called out, "Tommy, Sophie, stop being mushy and come eat. The soup is getting cold." They both laughed. As Sophie walked back into the warm glow of the restaurant, surrounded by people from every walk of life sharing a meal together, she realized something important. Kindness isn't about grand gestures. It's not about having money or power or influence. It's about the moment when you see someone fall and you choose to help them up instead of walking past. It's about recognizing that every person you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. It's about understanding that today's stranger could be tomorrow's family. And it's about believing that one small act of human decency can change the entire world. Sophie had learned all of this on a rainy night in London when she chose to help a confused old woman in a torn jacket. She'd lost a job, but she'd gained everything else. If this story touched your heart, remember, you never know whose life you might change with a simple act of kindness. The homeless person could be someone's precious parent. The struggling worker could be your future friend. Every person deserves dignity. Every person deserves compassion. What would you have done in Sophie's shoes? Would you have risked everything for a stranger? The answer to that question reveals who you really are. Thanks for your watching. Don't forget to share, like, and subscribe to the Story Room for meaningful stories that inspire and teach life lessons.